Hello and welcome to Beholden To Truth. It is September 11th, and we are here today for a special episode, sitting down in the studio to give this subject the full quality treatment that it deserves. As you all, I'm sure, have heard by now, yesterday, September 10th, in the afternoon, Charlie Kirk was assassinated at a live speaking event, and the newswire is flooded with content in terms of trying to figure out who the assassin was, what their motivation was, who they may have been working for, so on and so forth. And so I'd like to break down some of my immediate reactions. I wanted to sleep on it for 24 hours, maybe a little less, before I gave this a actual sit-down, long-format conversation. And I was pleased to see a couple of other people do the same. Inevitably, you're going to have a lot of people knowing that the sooner they jump on the topic, the more clicks, the more views they're going to get. And I'm not necessarily judging those people for doing so. But in the immediacy of an event like that, simply giving respect to the dead, especially if you have some critical things to say about them or their body of work, as a Christian, I think the first thing that I went on the record to say about the whole thing was, before we go out here and talk politics, this is a Christian man. He has a wife, he has a family, he has friends, he has church fellowship members that he is known for his whole life, for years, or so on and so forth. So we need to pray for the dead, pray for his family, and ask God to watch over his soul as it transitions into the kingdom of heaven, being there with Jesus Christ. We know that whatever you want to say about Charlie Kirk's advocacy for Zionism, for the nation of Israel, for Judeo-Christian values of the West, what is clear is that he was a man who believed that Jesus Christ was God, that Jesus died on the cross for the salvation of all mankind, and that Jesus is sovereign over all existence, and that qualifies him as a Christian, those very basic beliefs. He can have some heretical understandings of the Bible when it comes to Christian Zionism, but that does not change the fact that he did believe that Jesus Christ was God, that Jesus died on the cross, was resurrected, and the intention of that sacrifice is for all mankind to be brought into a covenant with Jesus and to be the remedy for the fallen nature of mankind and our slavery to sin. I think that much is irrefutable. And we're going to get into many more details about Charlie Kirk's personal beliefs and whether or not he was able to fully put them forth in the political arena, if he may have been compromised and unable to do so, what might his motivations have been for being so pro-Israel and taking this hard line about God's chosen people. We'll get into all of that, but as I said, first and foremost, the most important thing to do is to pray for his soul, may it rest in peace, and pray for his family. So let's now shift into actually breaking down this event and looking at it with a scrutinizing eye. The first thing I'll say is I had immediate flashbacks. Almost exactly 1 year ago, I was sitting in my house and somebody sent me a message saying, "Can you believe Donald Trump just got shot?" And I said, "Yeah, I can. I can. I'm honestly not surprised." And that's an awful thing to feel as an American, to not be surprised when the leader of the free world, the president of our country, who is beloved by tens of millions of people, if not hundreds of millions, to know that somebody may try to kill them on a public stage, on live TV, was not surprising to me whatsoever. Now, of course, I went on the record very quickly after that event and said I had a high degree of skepticism in terms of the authenticity of that event, whether or not it was an actual assassination attempt versus a staged hoax. And I don't want to fully derail today's subject by talking about that. But either way, the visceral gut reaction in the immediate term, when you first hear that news, I know that most people went through the same thing last night when they heard about Charlie Kirk. In fact, this was not unique to the gut reaction after we heard the news about the Butler, Pennsylvania shooting last year. I went through the same grieving when I heard first about Thomas Massey's wife. Before that, I think that was about 1.5 years ago at this point, maybe even 2 years. And I ended up creating a full-length documentary called Massey the Martyr, going into what I thought the true story was behind the death of Thomas Massey's wife, coming shortly after his appearance on Tucker Carlson and some things he said on Twitter and things he was trying to do in Congress in regards to forcing AIPAC to register as a foreign actor. Also talking about the capture of our currency and wanting it to be moved back to a precious metals backed currency and winding down the Federal Reserve. These things I think contributed to what happened to Thomas Massey's wife. And I went into great detail in that documentary about that. So this is the third time now. And if you want to consider two other examples of a high profile political assassination or assassination attempt, there's, of course, the Luigi Mangione attempt, or actually successful attempt at the healthcare CEO assassination. That's obviously politically motivated. And then the attempt on Nick Fuentes' life less than a year ago at his home. And so that is 5 high-profile political deaths that have happened in America alone, where we're starting to get desensitized and not even surprised when these things happen. And that is a very, very sad state of affairs to be in a country like ours. We don't see ourselves as a third world nation where political violence happens on a regular basis, all the way up to the presidential level, down to the guys who run podcasts or people who run political action committees. Unfortunately, this is where we are in American history. And it's not like this is the first time this has happened in American history. There have been other assassinations of presidents, obviously, and other political leaders. So this is just the reality of politics. And I'll talk more about that. The harsh reality of politics, having to basically surrender your life preemptively, be willing to put it all on the line if you dare to dip your toe in these waters, especially on the more controversial subjects, in particular, the influence of the international Jewish community, the nation of Israel, and its influence on America or Western civilization more broadly. And so I think that topic is pretty much unignorable when it comes to the life of Charlie Kirk. We know that Charlie Kirk was a Republican. He was some would say, alt-right commentator. I don't consider him alt-right. I think he's pretty much your normie GOP right political commentator who most of the time touts the company line, touts the GOP's line when it comes to conservative politics. Christian-based philosophies on marriage, abortion, etc., largely an immigration restrictionist, pretty traditional values, nothing too radical, I would say, defends the Second Amendment. Obviously, these things are disagreeable to the left side of politics, but for any conservative individuals in America, Charlie Kirk was not exactly transgressive. He was that's why I say I wouldn't consider him alternative right. He was just pretty much vanilla right. Something I want to say before we start criticizing Charlie is I think the most valuable content he ever put out there, I remember seeing this sometime earlier this year, I believe, was his defense of America as a Christian country. He did a public appearance where he did a Q&A session, and he responded to somebody challenging the idea that America is founded on Christianity or Christian principles. And he had a beautifully articulate 5-minute long response to that challenge. And this is something that is near and dear to my heart. Before I got particularly vocal about some of the more controversial issues going into Jewish influence and race realism and stuff like that, I've always known that America was a Christian country. And it's obviously true that a large portion of the population has apostatized over the last 60 years, especially. 60 years ago, America was a 90% Christian country, and that's according to Gallup polls and other surveys. This day and age, America is roughly a 50% Christian country. But that's this day and age. When we're talking about what made America a successful country for the previous 350 years, America was inarguably, obviously, it's empirically true, all the records are there, a Christian country. And I want to actually mention a specific book about this that I stumbled across some years ago called The Christian Life and Character of the Civil Institutions of the United States of America. No one has ever read this book because it's 1,000 pages and it's a pretty dull reading if it's not your passion subject, but it is by a guy named Benjamin Morris. It's available on Amazon and other places. But as I said, it is 1,000 pages of receipts that you can go out and confirm from the public records of Congress and many other historical sources that breaks down the original colonies of the United States before they were considered states or before they unified as the United States. And it talks about how it was obviously and explicitly clear in the original colonial constitutions that the leaders of those colonies had to be Christian, and that the Christian principles were imbued in our judicial system and the way we treat all humans. And I want to roll this video now because in Charlie's memory, despite having so many criticisms of him and how it relates to Zionism and all this, it is very clear that Charlie was a passionately Christian man, and he was very educated and skilled at defending the Christian identity of America. So I want to roll that for you guys just in his memory before we move into some of the more critical subjects.
I was articulated yesterday by a couple of my friends that our country was not founded on Christian principles. So I want to see how, like, an argument that you guys can give me to combat that. So essentially, they articulated to me that our country was founded on common law, because the Declaration only refers to God 4 times in the Constitution. It doesn't refer to God at all, and it only articulates the structure of government. And is common law Christian in nature, or is it not?
I can take it first. So this guy doesn't, whoever said that doesn't really know what they're talking about. So first of all, remember that we were a collection of states and colonies, and you need to read the state constitutions before anything else. 9 out of 13 of the original states required you to be a Bible-believing Christian to serve in government at the time of the founding. You could, even in actually, 13 out of 13 required a declaration of faith. 9 out of 13 required you to be a Protestant, except Maryland, which was Catholic, which still required a declaration of faith. In almost every single one of the original state constitutions, Pennsylvania included, they had, "I profess Lord and Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior," in the original state constitutions. So you remember, we're a collection of states before that. Secondly, 55 out of 56 of the original signers of the Declaration were Bible-believing, church-attending Christians. You asked about common law. So common law is inherited from Blackstone, who was Christian. A common law is an outgrowth of the scriptures. So let's go to 3 principles of common law: presumption of innocence, due process, and jury of your peers. All 3 are biblical principles. So, and all wrapped into the ultimate biblical principle that you shall not favor justice if you are rich or poor, which is in Leviticus 19, right before the most famous part of Leviticus 19, which is that you should love your neighbor as yourself. But before that is that in the administration of justice, you shall not favor the rich or the poor, which is the idea of blind justice. We get that in the West, which is incorporated also in the New Testament ideal: neither slave nor Greek nor Jew, you're all one in Jesus Christ, which we get the idea of human equality. These are all biblical ideas. They're not Enlightenment ideas, which is they kind of get conflated at the time. But more importantly than that, they say that God was only mentioned 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. Well, that's a big deal, okay? Laws of nature and nature's God. The last paragraph of the Declaration reads as a prayer. It says, "We appeal to the supreme judge of the universe." Who's the judge of the universe? Jesus Christ, as it says in Revelation, that Jesus will judge the earth on his throne. So in the Declaration, they were praying to Christ our Lord as a prayer very specifically. Thirdly, as I said on stage yesterday, Deuteronomy was by far the most quoted book, religious or non-religious, in the time of the founding when they were putting together the Constitution, more than John Locke, more than Montesquieu, more than Blackstone. So the book of Deuteronomy, which talked about laws, customs, traditions, it was Moses' farewell address as he's about to say goodbye, say, "Hey, good luck in Canaan, guys. Here's how you should set up your form of government." But finally, and most importantly, let's look at actually what the founders said. John Adams famously said the Constitution was only written for a moral and religious people. It was wholly inadequate for the people of any other. The body politic of America was so Christian and was so Protestant that our form and structure of government was built for the people that believed in Christ our Lord. One of the reasons we're living through a constitutional crisis is that we no longer have a Christian nation, but we have a Christian form of government, and they're incompatible. So you cannot have liberty if you do not have a Christian population. So that's just a surface level belief. So then they'll go to the First Amendment, which has two parts of the First Amendment which get conflated. First of all, separation of church and state is not in the U.S. Constitution. That is a single letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1807 to the Danbury Baptist Convention in Massachusetts, assuring them that the government would not come after the church, okay, which is the opposite of what they would say. However, that was then resurrected by the Warren Court and the Burger Court in the 60s, where they said, hey, all of a sudden, we're now going to make this as if it's the Constitution. It does say in the Constitution 2 things, which is the Establishment Clause and the Free Expression Clause. The Establishment Clause is that Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof. What they were most worried about was a Presbyterian or a Anglican or a Quaker type religion taking over the federal government. Instead, it was that there is not going to be a state-run religion or a state-run government. Did you know that one of the first acts of Congress was taxpayer-funded Bible printing and distribution? Did you know that there were church services held in the Supreme Court building as late as the Jackson presidency in the 1820s? But going back to this idea of separation of church and state, and again, I could riff on this ad nauseum because it's just so ridiculous, right? Is that it's not biblical because first, it's not biblical. It's not constitutional because you go a layer deeper. People that even say that, do you believe in separation of morality and state? Nobody does. So all laws are a reflection of morality, and all morality comes from somewhere. There is no such thing as neutral morality. And we believe what the founders believed because they put it in the halls of Congress, they put it in the Supreme Court, and they put it all throughout the country, which is that the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, is the core morality of how a society and a civilization should exist, right? The 10 Commandments of every person. And finally, and this is the kicker, if the founding fathers were not Bible-believing church-attending Christians, why did they put Leviticus on the Liberty Bell? Not John, not Psalms, not Proverbs, not Genesis, Leviticus. Most Americans can't spell Leviticus. Leviticus 25:19, proclaim liberty throughout the land of which you are in. It is one of the most sinister, most unsubstantiated lies that does not come up against any sort of academic scrutiny. This idea that founding fathers were a bunch of Enlightenment common law deists. The reason they hate it is because the reason they must say this is that if we actually go back to our Christian roots and we go back to where we once were, it's America's best hope for revival and for a great future. You want to add to that, anything? Sorry.
That covered it. That was pretty impressive. I can't touch that. Beautifully put. Yeah.
So I hope you appreciated that perspective from Charlie. This is something that has been on my to-do list for 4 years, is actually creating a full-length documentary, laying out all of the things Charlie just said and probably 100 other examples that if you just look at the historical record, it is inarguable. America is a Christian country, always has been a Christian country. It's in our DNA. Our culture, our judicial system, obviously the religious fabric of the nation, these things have always been consistent, and it's only in the last 60 years that started to change. And as Christians, we should be up in arms about this. We should be devout in our faith and courageously confronting that change. And so hopefully that documentary will come. It's been on the to-do list for 4 years just because when I sat down to start citing sources on all this, I found that there were so many sources it was difficult to even narrow it down and say, like, okay, well, which pieces are the most compelling? Because there's genuinely too many. It's not hard to find proof that America was founded as a Christian country. So maybe I'll get back to that, I hope. I would like to do that for you guys. It's one of the most important subjects there is in terms of protecting the historic identity of this nation. So that being said, the backslide from the Christian faith of America, the moral fabric of our nation being inextricably tied to our Christian faith, you have to realize that that is a spiritual war. Beyond the wars of culture and races and ethnicities and nations, at the end of the day, we are always forever in a spiritual war between good and evil, Jesus Christ and Satan. And in that war, there have always been casualties. There's been a body count. And we know politics being downstream from religion. When you engage in politics, inadvertently or intentionally, whether you know it or not, you are engaging in the spiritual war. And so the evil side of that spiritual war, Satan and his minions who he has influenced consciously or unconsciously, they are going to fight back with lethal force. And this is just the reality of war, and specifically political war, which is really spiritual war. So when we see these assassinations and you see well-known figures losing their lives to defend the political discourse of this nation or any nation, you have to understand that that's simply a piece of the eternal spiritual war of good and evil. It's not a matter of Republicans and Democrats or left versus right or this nation versus that other nation. Spiritually speaking, as Christians, we understand that God uses his people for righteous reasons. Satan uses those he has garnered influence over for his reasons, and we are always fighting. And it's hard to absorb when you see good Christian men lose their lives in this fight with that facade that it is all about politics and left and right and the woke and the Democrats and all that stuff. You want to point fingers at them, but at the end of the day, This is the same thing as these public school shootings where you're talking about a transgender individual influenced by pharma, MK Ultra, whatever political agenda they might have. It's easy to point to those surface level causes of these violent events. But as I said, at the end of the ball of yarn, when you pull it all the way back, you find spiritual evil. You find darkness in the highest places of society scheming to advance Satan's agenda, to pull people away from the faith, to discourage them, to erode the faith of nations. That is what it is always about. So this example is just another in the long history of Christianity versus every other form of religion out there. It's a sad day because this is going to get used for many different political agendas. It's going to be used for gun grabs, and it's going to be used to talk about civil war. It's going to be used to talk about Republicans and Democrats and how important it is that you vote for this candidate or that candidate. But what we should really be talking about is revival. That is the only solution, that the Christians of America and even the non-Christians who aren't there yet, they are brought into the fold. The scale is lifted from their eyes. They see that Jesus Christ is their only mode of salvation. He is the remedy for sin. He is the only way to have a relationship with God, as dictated in John 14:6. He is the only way, the truth, and the life, and that there is no way to the Father except through him. That disqualifies every other religion of the world and a-religious, aka atheist or agnostic perspectives. If Jesus Christ is the way, the single truth, and the single life, and that he is the single pathway to knowing God, then that means Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Sikhism, paganism, it doesn't matter. All of these are invalid in terms of living in harmony with the creator of the universe, the arbiter of morality, the only one we should trust with our salvation. So let's get into what happened with Charlie Kirk. Obviously, he was shot at a public event in the neck or chest area. We've seen the gruesome footage. It's very hard to watch. There's going to be some people looking at that event and scrutinizing it to try to figure out if it even really happened, like the Donald Trump alleged assassination attempt. People have been looking at this most recent subway murder of Irina, the Ukrainian girl on the subway killed by the black murderer, talking about how that's probably a psyop, a staged event. Whether or not you believe these things really happen and this person's genuinely dead, or if you believe that these are staged events with crisis actors, these victims are ushered off into some kind of witness protection program, living in secrecy for the rest of their life. That stuff is actually not quite as important as what the problem, reaction, solution formula is coming from the powers that be. Whether or not they are genuinely dead and we never hear from them again because they're dead, or because they go into the witness protection program, the solution in that problem, reaction, solution is what we should be keeping our eyes on. What is it that the powers that be who engineered this event want us to be thinking the solution is? And so to rewind a little bit and say the powers that be who engineer and orchestrate these events, first, I need to make it very, very clear that in all of these events, especially political assassinations, it is never, ever a crazed lone gunman, because of course, that's the first thing they try to throw out there. That this is a left-wing lunatic, a woke zealot, somebody who watched too much Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, too much Gavin Newsom, somebody who saw too many school shootings and wants the Second Amendment to be disbanded, somebody who thinks Charlie Kirk is a real-life white supremacist Nazi, and that's why they just found themselves a gun, crawled up on a building, and killed him at a public event. Leftism has gone too far. Okay, this is the immediate response, what you're seeing from Con Inc., from the Republican Party, from the Matt Walshes of the world, the Glenn Becks of the world, and from the president of the country, Donald Trump himself. Leftism has gone too far. You're going to see this all up and down the Twitter sphere, Instagram, Fox News, Newsmax, every other conservative media outlet. They're going to be telling you that this is as simple as some left-wing zealot went out and committed political violence because this is what you get with too much wokeism, too much leftism. Okay, that's not what happened. We need to establish that first. That is not what happened. When you look at the details of the event itself, this individual shooting from 200 yards away, a perfectly executed shot in the neck, the escape of this individual, where immediately after the shot, there are not one, but two individuals who gain the attention of the police, and they waste their time pursuing these two individuals, arresting them, questioning them, while the actual shooter gets away. This was obviously a professional hit job. The accuracy of the shot, the multiple false flag perpetrators who are wasting the attention of the people and the government officials. This was obviously a highly planned, coordinated, professionally executed assassination. So I want to make sure everybody understands that first, that you're not buying this entire left-wing zealot. We got to do something about those darn Democrats and how crazy woke they are. When you understand that it's not the left, the quote-unquote left, progressives, liberals, the Democrats, or whoever, that are responsible for the death of Charlie Kirk, the question should obviously be, okay, well, then who is? Who did want Charlie Kirk dead, and why? And so that's where we start getting into the fun stuff, in my opinion. And it's not to make light or fun of the situation. What is fun to me is exposing darkness in the highest places of society. Who is really running the show? What do they want, especially out of an event like this? And so pretty quickly after this happened, Harrison Smith, who is a political commentator for InfoWars, was bubbled up on Twitter for a tweet that he made about a month ago, actually, where he said that according to one of his sources who are close to Charlie Kirk, Charlie has expressed fear for his life if he were to come out against Israel. And this actually shouldn't be that controversial or surprising. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he said that in confidence to somebody. Or even, well, can we really trust Harrison Smith and his unnamed citation? Well, we actually just have the videos of Charlie himself saying this. He did a number of episodes on various people's shows, including his own, that I want to play for you guys in this episode, because what you're going to detect is a pattern of slowly adopting some of these Israel critical or even Jewish critical talking points that have been hallmarks of the America First movement, that Nick Fuentes has been saying for 8 years, that many other people before Nick have pointed out about Jewish influence, their ties to the cultural ills in our society, their direct ties to mass immigration, the ties to the political lobbying on behalf of AIPAC for Israel. Charlie Kirk started to entertain some of those subjects that were previously considered way beyond the pale, taboo, anti-Semitic tropes, and so on. And there's not a shortage of these foreshadowing discussions before his assassination. I think I have 5 different ones that I'm going to roll for you guys, beginning with a discussion that he had on Patrick Bet David, where he talks about immediately after October 7th, he knew something was up with the official narrative, where he knew that Israel is one of the most protected in terms of border security, surveillance, and military nations in the world. And it's not that large of a border to patrol in the first place. And so the idea that Hamas was able to come in there and flood the zone and for hours and hours and hours rape and behead people and get these hostages with basically impunity, with no reaction from the Israeli forces, he found that highly sketchy. And this is somebody, as he says, who has been to Israel many times. He's flown over in helicopters. He's walked the border himself. He's seen the armed guards. He's seen the surveillance cameras. He knows their military strategies. He knows their intelligence capabilities. And so for Charlie to express skepticism towards October 7th in the official narrative that Israel was asking him to put forth in the media, but also putting forth themselves, that was one of the early cracks in the surface when it comes to the uncomfortable role Charlie was put in as leading Turning Point USA, as being a Christian Zionist who believes that the Jews are God's chosen people and that the Jews being the protectors of the Holy Land is a good thing. Well, he had to reconcile how it could be that these people who we trust as our, quote, greatest ally would pretty much obviously allow such an event to happen.
this. So I've been to Israel many times. The whole country's a fortress. When I first heard this story, I still have the same gut instinct that I did initially. I find this very hard to believe. I've been to that Gaza border. You cannot go 10 feet without running into a 19-year-old with an AR-15 or an automatic machine gun that is an IDF soldier, right? The whole country is surveilled. And so let me just kind of go through this. We don't talk about Israeli politics very often, and most Americans don't know this. The last 9 months, Israel was on the brink of civil war. It's not an exaggeration. This judicial stuff, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets because Bibi Netanyahu was basically redefining the Israeli constitution. That's not an exaggeration, right? He said the judicial branch has too much power. There were protests planned this week against Netanyahu, where they anticipated tens of thousands of people to take to the streets. That's all gone, Patrick. Netanyahu now has an... That's all gone, Patrick. Netanyahu now has an emergency government and a mandate to lead. I'm not willing to go so far that saying that Netanyahu knew or there was intelligence here, but I think some questions need to be asked. Was there a stand down order? Was there a stand down order?
And you can pretty quickly interpret from that they allowed it to happen for one, but that there are reasons why they would allow such a thing to happen. And those reasons are probably because they want to annex Gaza, the West Bank, and so on. They have plans for that territory, economic plans, but also population plans, religious plans, the greater Israel agenda. And so to think that Charlie Kirk was naive about the plans and the benefits of October 7th, I think that's very, very naive, especially as somebody who is so deeply embedded in the Israel cause. And for him to go out there and talk about this with Patrick Bet-David saying, I'm having a hard time believing the official narrative about that. You got to know that his Israeli backers who support Turning Point USA and all of their activity in the political arena were not happy with him doing that. Of course, then he goes on to do this focus group within Turning Point USA, where he has some of their TPUSA ambassadors sat down in a private room discussion and allows them to talk about some of the more controversial historical events that Israel has perpetrated or been involved with against America. Things like the USS Liberty, things like their role in 9/11, the cultural ills that Jewish people are known to have been behind. So to allow some of his own people, Turning Point USA ambassadors, to speak openly about these subjects, where previously, if you wanted to be part of Turning Point USA and ask questions about Israel, you just got kicked out. It was do not pass go, do not collect $200. And Nick Fuentes has told this story before. And there are plenty of other attempted Turning Point USA ambassadors who would be able to vouch for that there was just no place for you in TPUSA or pretty much any of the mainstream conservative outlets if you wanted to challenge some of the questions about Israel being our greatest ally, if you wanted to bring up historical events in terms of the international relations between our two countries.
So you're ethnically Jewish.
Ethnically Jewish, yes.
And you have concerns about AIPAC.
Yes, I do.
I'm told that by some people that if I criticize AIPAC, I'm anti-Semitic.
I think it's ridiculous, yeah. I feel like it's great to have a concern for your country.
Do you think that that AIPAC represents, again, I'm not saying I believe this, but I think this is what you're saying, that it represents a kind of cutting in line of prioritization away from the American people?
Yes.
Would you guys say that's a fair summary?
100%.
Meaning that, like, okay, we vote, we're citizens, but a separate group gets higher priority because of whatever reasons. You look like you want to chime in.
That the entirety of the idea of a PAC is to represent a group, but the fact that we're allowing a group that doesn't even represent American interests to influence the people who are supposed to be representing us, I have a huge problem with.
There is another video of Charlie Kirk on his own show where he is talking about the fact that many people are starting to connect the dots when it comes to all of these cultural ills in America and Western civilization more broadly. There are Jewish leaders that have put forth these ideas and promoted them with financial backing in the media, in the education system, in the government, and we can't ignore the fact that these leaders of these movements were Jewish.
Jewish communities have been pushing the exact kind of hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them. Now, I don't like generalizations. Not every Jewish person believes that. But it is true the Anti-Defamation League was part and parcel with Black Lives Matter. It is true that some of the largest financiers of left-wing, anti-white causes have been Jewish Americans. They went all in on woke, and it wasn't just ADL. It was some of the top Jewish organizations in the country that have done that. In fact, we have seen this with the recent retreat of Jewish donations that are no longer going to be administered to colleges, right? Mark Rowan, Leon Kopperman. Can we get that full list? It's very powerful. The part of the, so that's totally true. And by the way, Tucker Carlson reinforces this. So I'm going to kind of, it was quite a day on the internet. Tucker Carlson was interviewing Candace Owens that Jewish Americans have primarily been financing cultural Marxist ideas. We said this, by the way, last week, and people came after us.
We were on top of it.
We actually said it in a different way. We said, I'm glad that Jewish Americans are reconsidering their financing of cultural Marxism. And people misunderstood it intentionally and slandered us as being anti-Semites. But listen to this. Tucker Carlson is completely correct by saying this, that the philosophical foundation of anti-whiteness has been largely financed by Jewish. And Jewish donors, they have a lot of explaining to do, a lot of decoupling to do, because Jewish donors have been the #1 funding mechanism of radical, open border, neoliberal, quasi-Marxist policies, cultural institutions, and nonprofits. This is a beast created by secular Jews. And now it's coming for Jews, and they're like, what on earth happened? And it's not just the colleges. It's the nonprofits, it's the movies, it's Hollywood, it's all of it. It's like time for you guys to wake up and say no more, draw a line in the sand. I don't care if you hate me.
Now, of course, you can refute that by saying, well, listen, it's not all Jews who stand behind feminism or stand behind mass immigration, stand behind legalizing gay marriage, stand behind pushing transgenderism, stand behind pornography and prostitution, stand behind communism and socialism. On and on and on, you continue to find Jewish thought leaders behind each of these movements. And Charlie actually finally confesses this on his own show. And he says, listen, the Jews have to confront this. It's not good for them to just call everybody anti-Semitic who says this out loud. And so this is continually, over time, Charlie Kirk, staunch pro-Zionist, staunch anti-Semitism leader who will never allow any thoughts or entertain the idea that there is something up with the nepotism of Jews, Jews internationally advocating for themselves before the nations that they're occupying, meddling in international politics, being conflicts of interest, the dual citizenship situation, AIPAC lobbying and all this, where for years and years and years, when the Groypers would bring these subjects to him, he had to hand wave them away and say, oh, that's just irrational anti-Semitism rooted in hatred. There's no place for that discussion here on Turning Point USA, on our tours, on our shows, and so on and so forth. This is him having to confront these subjects in a post-October 7th world. Israel obviously misrepresenting the situation of October 7th. Israel obviously using this term anti-Semitic to stifle the conversation around AIPAC lobbying, using this term to stifle the conversation around the origins of many of these cultural ailments, these cancers in our society that were created by Jewish thought leaders and propagated all throughout Western civilization. We're watching Charlie slowly having to concede each one of these points that he previously would not entertain. At one of his recent Turning Point events, he had Dave Smith, who's obviously Jewish himself, but has leaned heavily into politics, especially the conflict in Gaza, saying, listen, even I, as a Jew, I have to say what is so obviously true. Israel is committing a genocide. It's an ethnocide. It's ethnic cleansing. They're causing a famine. It's intentional. They do not have sympathy for the Palestinian people. They haven't for decades. And this has been going on for far longer than October 7th. And this is a Jewish man calling out his own people.
Now, if you go read Coping with Crumbling States or the Clean Break memo in the 90s, when the neocons admitted they wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein, they never said it was because he had nuclear weapons. They said he was a problem for Israel in the region. They only made up that lie after 9/11 because they knew that's what would sell you, or maybe not you, you're too young, but sell your moms and dads on going and fighting this war. And by the way, when they talked about wanting to overthrow Iran, it was the same thing. Never had nothing to do with a nuclear threat. That's just the thing they use now as the excuse. So yes, there is tremendous influence by Israel in our government. That doesn't mean I'm subscribing to some crazy conspiracy or telling you to hate Jewish people. I'm Jewish. I'm just saying they have influence. They've used it in a very negative way, and we should reject this insane foreign policy and embrace the foreign policy that Dr. Ron Paul advocated, which is the foreign policy of the founding fathers. Stay out of entangling alliances, stay out of unnecessary wars, be friends with the world, and trade with the world. That's the key to prosperity.
And so Turning Point and Charlie specifically have Dave Smith on stage to share his side of the argument. And he hosts a debate with Josh Hammer, and they provide the kind of two competing ideas. But at a sanctioned Turning Point USA event, he is now allowing anti-Israel conversation to be had. And I think another very, very telling clip is the one with Megyn Kelly, where they are on air live talking about how the two of them, despite being lifelong defenders of Israel, lifelong Christian Zionists, because they have done those previous things that I mentioned, the Patrick Bet-David conversation about October 7th, the focus group with the Turning Point USA ambassadors, talking about the cultural movements that Jewish people have lobbied for, the ties to mass immigration, allowing Dave Smith at the Turning Point USA event. Because Charlie has done these things, and maybe Megyn Kelly echoed some of those statements, the two of them, despite being lifelong defenders of Israel, are now being called anti-Semitic by people who support Israel or by Jews in the community.
But it goes to the point where, if, for example, if I have less ability sometimes online to criticize the Israeli government without backlash than actual Israelis do. It's
been
almost
so
as if
unfair.
you,
they were coming after you after Turning Point for, among other things, that you had Dave Smith there. Dave Smith is allowed to criticize Israel. You had both sides. The Israeli side was overrepresented.
Though. No, you're not allowed to. It's even worse than that. Like, I host a person that I moderate the debate of, mind you, right? And I give equal time to Josh Hammer, equal time to a pro-Israel advocate. And my moral character is being put into question. And so I think it's a hyper paranoid, like, we're just going to try to, we're going to just stamp out everything type of practice.
It's there's some rule you can't go there when it comes to Israel.
Well, you and I believe that we're Americans and Americans first, period. End of story. We are citizens of this nation, okay?
That's right.
Israel, we have funded, we have supported. Not like we're going to, but we're like, honestly, the way you are treating me is so repulsive. I have text messages, Megyn, calling me an anti-Semite. But my moral character is now being put into question, Megyn. Not my decisions. Not like, hey, are you doing this? Is it smart or is it dumb? But no, I am a bad person if I do this. And I could go, I mean, you saw it, Megyn. It was trending on Twitter, thousands of tweets and text messages.
It's offensive to those of us who have been out there defending them in many instances against critics on our own side.
And he says that basically I, despite having defended Israel for my whole life, am currently being called anti-Semitic, and I basically have no leeway whatsoever to use my freedom of speech to acknowledge facts that are true on the ground, presently or historically. And that's not okay. You know, I am an American. I have freedom of speech. I'm a Christian. I'm a good man. When I see a genocide happening, I can't condone that activity. And when I look at the historical receipts of all these social movements, I can't just ignore that what is true about them is they had Jewish thought leaders creating them and financing their proliferation in our society. And it's okay if I allow some of my Turning Point USA ambassadors to ask questions about history, to dig into 9/11 or to dig into the USS Liberty, to dig into the JFK assassination. You know, I have to be okay with these things because I'm a proponent of free speech and I am at the first priority an American. I'm not an Israeli. I may love Israel. I may think that the Jews have a special place in a covenant with God, but I am an American first. And so when he starts dropping language that sounds very similar to a Nick Fuentes style perspective of America first, Of course, Nick doesn't hold any sympathy to Israel or the Jewish religion and their alleged ties to America, the greatest ally narrative and all of that. But nonetheless, Charlie finally having some objectivity about these subjects, I think we're finally reaching why yesterday happened. And this is the true meat of the story. It gets to a point where Charlie, unfortunately, despite being a Christian man, believing that Jesus Christ is God and is the only way of salvation for all mankind, he was indoctrinated with this Christian Zionism, no different than the other tens of millions of Christian Zionists in America alone. That happened to Charlie Kirk probably at a young age. He died at 31. And from a young age, he was told this whole Jews are God's chosen people. We have to bless Israel lest we be cursed, and all of this stuff from Genesis, the Scofield Bible teachings of Christian Zionism. And I think he probably bought into those things, and that's why he was so empathetic to Israel and wanted to try to protect their reputation. But as the reality started to surface about Israel and their true nature, and that some of these historical things didn't add up in terms of the foreign nation of Israel versus the Israelites of the Old Testament, it became harder and harder for him to defend that position. Unfortunately, this is not something, when it comes to being a leader in politics, once you're given millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, once you're given fame, influence, and status in society, you can't just walk away from those things. It's a lot like the celebrities in Hollywood that you see. Once they have made a deal with the devil, they can't just go walk away scot-free and say, hey guys, I made a deal with the devil and now they're trying to kill me. So just trying to put that out there, and I'm trying to get away from it all now. Trying to leave the plantation of the contract that you have made with the devil doesn't work that way. Whether or not it's direct threats on your own livelihood or your mortal life, there are plenty of other blackmail tactics they use to discourage you from doing that, such as threatening your family. So these are the most evil people in the world, by the way. The people who show you the contract with the devil and they say, you want to be the largest influencer of young men in this country and try to preserve conservatism in America? Okay, we can hook you up with that gig. We'll let you tour the country talking to colleges and university campus events, and you're going to be a household name. You're going to be on Fox News. You're going to have your own company. You're going to be a multi-millionaire. Sounds pretty appealing, doesn't it? What they don't divulge from the beginning is that there is no escape route. Once you sign that contract and you accept that role, if the facts on the ground change, maybe you get a bit more historically educated, maybe you get a bit more biblically educated, whatever it may be, if your understanding of the world and politics and religion change, you're still under contract and there's no getting out of it. You don't just hire a lawyer and say, okay, I had 2 years left on my Turning Point USA contract. Is there any way I can get out of this? And look, maybe I'll even pay $1 million cancellation fee for violating my contract. Are we good, guys? Can we just shake hands and go separate ways? Please, don't be a child. Don't think that that's how it works. At these levels of influence, we're talking about influencing tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people for the purpose of the prosperity of nations, for the purpose of expanding the greater Israel agenda that has been planned for over 100 years, for the construction of the third temple. I mean, these are events, as I said, that have been planned for 100 years. You don't just walk away from something like that you were previously a key contributor to ensuring the success of, because, now we have a disagreement about what the Bible says. Now we have a disagreement about the nature of our alliance. Now you just have a disagreement about the nature of our relationship, calling us your greatest ally and all this. So, maybe let's just get out of this contract, go separate ways. Doesn't work that way. Not at all. And I think that's where Charlie found himself, unfortunately. He was conflicted as a Christian man, as somebody who was continually learning new things, continually getting a better understanding of what the true teachings of the Bible are in relation to Jews and Christians. in relation to history and Israel's subversion of America over the last 100 years, the tactics they have used to accumulate their power and influence, things like the Samson option. And he found it harder and harder to stand by, wanting to be a man of integrity. And so he started saying some things in all of these previous examples I provided. And the decision was made by the individuals who forced him to sign that metaphorical contract with the devil to end the contract. And I don't want that to sound insensitive, but you know what I mean. And the only way to end that contract, to ensure that more damage isn't done beyond that contract, is to end that life. And that's the harsh reality of politics. That's the harsh reality of making the deal with the devil. And a lot of times these people don't even know they're making a deal with the devil. They think they're just making a deal to accumulate fame, influence, wealth, and so on. But the devil can offer you this world. What he can't offer you is salvation. That's what you're supposed to learn from the New Testament. This is the same offer the devil made to Jesus Christ. You're supposed to learn from that story that no matter what trappings of this fallen material world the devil offers you, infinite wealth, infinite status, power, influence, anything you want, when it comes with the strings attached of you have to go do my work though, my being the devil, you have to turn down the offer. It's just that simple. You can't sell your soul to Hollywood, to the finance industry, to the government, to some foreign government, and think that payday is not going to come. And as I said, I don't want this to sound dispassionate in terms of the loss of Charlie Kirk's life. I do believe he is in heaven. He is reunited with Jesus Christ. God is having mercy on his soul. But I think these are the events that led up to what we saw happen yesterday. An interesting question is now, who fills the hole? You know, Charlie Kirk was a very, very prominent and very successful individual in conservative politics, in particular reaching the young demographic. And who it's going to be, the next conservative, probably they're going to source somebody in Con Inc., whether it's a Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, some other guy like that, to go and do these college campus events and try to gatekeep what is tolerable in the public discourse in relation to race realism, in relation to standing for Christianity exclusively, which does mean excluding Judaism. I don't know who they're going to tap for that gatekeeping endeavor. They don't want a Nick Fuentes character. They don't want somebody like me. They don't want a Christian nationalist. They don't want a white nationalist. They want somebody who's going to toe the company line of America's a meritocracy. We're a melting pot. It's all about the American dream. We aren't religious zealots here, and we're certainly not white supremacists here. We are racially colorblind. It's about a working class populist model. All of the platitudes that you've heard so many times before, ever since the civil rights movement, that's who they're looking for to fill the hole for Charlie Kirk in Turning Point USA. And I genuinely have no idea who they're going to find to do that. I think that's an interesting question that we can have talked about, but it's not really the nature of this show. It's thinking a little too far ahead. I think what is probably more interesting to me is the chilling effect of this event, where if they're willing to kill the most milquetoast, pro-Israel conservative guy out there that the left consider Hitler, white supremacist, blah, 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 but the guy's never been particularly pro-white. The guy's never been a Christo-fascist. If they're willing to kill him, then what do you think they're willing to do to further right individuals, a guy like a Nick Fuentes or somebody like myself or anybody who actually goes out there and says America needs to be a majority white country. We need to have protected spaces for whites. The leadership class of our country and all of its civil institutions need to be run by white people. And they obviously have to be Christian. If they're willing to kill somebody who has influence, who isn't saying those things, I think you probably understand the danger that those who are advancing and successfully accumulating influence calling for those things. So we should all be praying for the protection and providence of those who are standing out there on America First values, true America First values, the white identity of this country, the Christian heritage of this country, a historically traditional patriarchy needing to be established in this country, reestablished, those people are in danger, very much so. I mean, just 2 days ago, I recorded a vlog that my career of 20 years was ended a couple of weeks ago. Why? Because I used a racial slur in my own personal private time, not in the workplace, not even directed at anybody, but still some anonymous social justice warrior, bad faith actor contacted my employer, got me fired because I used a racial slur on my social media content. So as simple as something like that, where you work 20 years to build a career and these people are so intolerant of white identity, using a racial slur, that they'll destroy your livelihood. You can't pay for your home, feed yourself, so on. When they're so quickly, obviously going to do something like that to everybody who stands up for these values, and then you see them willing to murder a guy like Charlie Kirk, who isn't even that transgressive, what you saw happen with Nick Fuentes at his own home last year, our people are in danger. Not just economic danger, as I described with my situation. We are in physical danger. We need to be armed. We need to know how to use those arms. We need to be not necessarily paranoid, but we need to be operating 24/7, 365 with the consciousness that we are in the bullseye. These people are violent. They're irrational. They do not like us. They will resort to any tactics under the sun, up to and including murder. They'll start with reputational damage. They'll start with financial damage, attacks on your career. They'll maybe try to reach out to your friend networks and so on to slander you and just harm you emotionally. And if those things aren't enough to discourage you from doing this work, they will escalate. They will get violent. I think finally I want to talk about what the end game is here by the powers that be who orchestrated this event. And you can find out what the end game is pretty quickly by watching the reaction of Con Inc. Con Inc. is quickly putting all the blame on these left-wing zealots. This is what you get with too much wokeism, too much CNN, too much Washington Post, too much New York Times, too much Netflix. All of the media outlets who are pushing the pro-LGBT, anti-white, anti-Christian worldviews. Well, all of those things come together in forming these crazed lone gunmen who are so zealous in their left-wing ideologies that they will go out and murder strangers or murder political leaders, murder CEOs of healthcare companies. That's what they want you to believe, but I explained before that that needs to be immediately swatted down because that is not what happened. They want to turn this into a left versus right situation. They want to stoke the flames of that civil war, and they want that to be the dividing line. They don't want either side looking upward to see who is controlling the left, who is controlling the right, and the commonality across that bridge. We need to be looking at much higher levels of society in terms of the elites, in terms of the transnational groups that work behind the scenes, behind the curtains, with access to trillions and trillions of dollars. The war chest of people like George Soros and Larry Fink, the guys like Mark Zuckerberg, the guys who run Google, Sam Altman running OpenAI, all of the leaders of our industries, our most important industries being the media, finance, government, and education. When you look into those who are running those critical civil institutions and you find the commonality across them of very oftentimes being allegiant to Jewish causes, Jewish themselves, pro-Israel, Zionists, that's a problem. That's a big problem. That's honestly how you end up with people like Charlie Kirk being killed, people like Nick Fuentes having attempts on their life, people like Thomas Massey having his wife murdered, people like JFK being assassinated. That's how you end up with guys like me who are racially conscious, who have critical things to say about Jews. Those two subjects are inextricably tied. To say that you are conscious of white people as a race, that they have their own methods of civilization that need to be protected, including their sheer numbers, but also the style of their civilizations, the lands they're built on. Well, those are exclusionary to all other races, including Jews. And so Jews, being the ones who are actually in positions of power in this country, they really don't like the idea of white people saying, hey, all of this stuff needs to be run by white people, because that displaces them from their positions of power. And so when you find out that Jews are extremely disproportionately represented in the most powerful institutions of America, the government, the media, finance, education, when you find out that Jews are running a majorly overproportionate share of those roles, they're not going to be down for the pro-white cause. And so if you are an individual who is in contradiction to their values, they don't want you popularizing your ideas, and they definitely don't want you gaining influence in those different civil institutions. So as much as Black people and Asians and Hispanics may not like our ideas, it's a little less significant that they don't like our ideas because they're not the ones in positions of power. Jews are. And so Jews are the ones who would actually be displaced by white identity becoming a national movement, by the identity of this country being restored as a white nation, yes, with tolerance for other people living here, but for America to exist to be a safe harbor for white culture, white civilization, just like all of the other European nations, that is a highest threat to Jewish people before it is a threat to everybody else. So this is a big problem in terms of the chilling effect that Charlie Kirk's assassination represents, because Charlie Kirk was not that transgressive. He only recently started to talk a little bit about Jewish influence, the role of Israel being a conflict of interest to America. He advocated a little bit for whites, but not really. Yeah, they took him out. When we start to accumulate an audience the size of Charlie Kirk's, we being pro-white Christians that want these values installed and protected in America in perpetuity, we are going to be under more threat than we already currently are. And if you think me losing my job is bad, wait until they start coming for our lives. It's inevitable. They already don't want you to have free speech. They're constantly censoring us on the social media platforms. They own. They don't want us gaining positions in government because the public slander campaigns they run demonstrate that. Whenever you are somebody who's critical of Israel, they use AIPAC and other lobbying institutions to finance counter candidacies and get you displaced or never even entered into those seats. And that's true at the county, city, state, and federal level. This has been going on for your entire life, and it's not going to change until courage is the way of life of all of us white Christians out there. It frankly doesn't matter how many of us are lost in this cause, because if we aren't the martyrs who go out there and lose our careers at a minimum, or your reputation at the minimum, you lose some friends, family relationships, romantic opportunities, you get kicked out of whatever church you were in because you said something about Jews. Yeah, that stuff is peanuts. And I'm saying this as somebody who lost their career making a couple $100,000 a year. I still understand, in the grand scheme of things, I am no martyr. Do you understand that this is going to get worse? I started this conversation out by saying we are in a war and that wars have body counts. I'm not excited about this. I don't want people to die. I don't want to die. I don't want my future family to be worried about my safety. I don't want anybody who is pro-white Christian to be worried about their physical safety and having to constantly entertain this dilemma of, I got to do something to save this country, but I really don't want to die. I'd really like to keep my job. We don't get out of that situation without courage and without being willing to be a martyr. Not all of us will have to be, and I think it will honestly be a small number, but there are going to be martyrs in this cause. And because we know that, we accept that, we understand the history of Christianity, we have to pray that those martyrs will be ushered into God's kingdom, that God will have mercy on their soul, and that the work that they did while on this earth will move the whole thing forward for Christ's kingdom and for the defense of white people simply doing what all people in the world do, protect their kin. So what I really don't want to see coming out of this event is, oh man, look, Charlie started to go there and they took him out. So I'm not saying a damn word. or when you hear my story that, hey, I've been pushing on these things for 4 years, my career gets destroyed. You can't be discouraged. You can't let that allow you to become a coward. There's plenty of other people I can point to. Jared Taylor, Sam Francis. Look at the persecution of people like Mel Gibson, Henry Ford, anybody who's ever come out and talked publicly about the situation of Jewish influence, anybody who's gone out and talked about the necessity of defending white people in this country. It happens time and time and time again. At a minimum, it's reputational assassination. At a maximum, it's actual assassination. Doesn't matter. We have to move forward. We have to accept the risks. We have to be willing to give everything that we have. We are here on loan. Need I remind you of that? If you're a Christian, you know that. Everything that you have, your life savings, your home, even your family members, this physical body that your soul rests in, these are all temporal. They mean nothing in terms of eternity. So we have to be willing to give them up to stand on truth. I've tried to embody that in my body of work over the last 4 years. I've given everything I have other than my mortal life. And hopefully that demonstration of courage, willing to self-sacrifice, is inspirational to you guys. I know I was personally inspired to do this by watching people do the same, by watching Nick over the span of 8 years go through what he has gone through, and watching Jared Taylor go through what he had to go through over the last 30 years. And watching the countless examples of individuals who just want to say something on a podcast about Jewish influence get their reputations attacked by all of the various ADL, Southern Poverty Law Center, Media Matters, Right Wing Watch. It's a formula. This is just how it works. It's expected. You have to be ready for it, and you have to be strong enough to endure the pain of it. So, guys, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up this episode. I want you all to remember the key takeaway here is that this is not a right versus left battle. It's not Republicans and Democrats. Hopefully you're all smart enough to understand that at this point. This is good versus evil. This is Christians versus those who believe Jesus Christ is burning in hell. Never forget that. Never forget that. Israel, the religious faith that it is tied to, the cultural values that it stands for, the international interest of Jewish people, these things are all contra to American values. American values are inextricably tied to the two shoulders that made America great, the European people and our Christian faith. Those are both directly, diametrically opposed to Jewish interests, always have been, thousands of years. And we have to say what must be said about that. We can put it bluntly, it's going to hurt people's feelings. It might get you censored. It might have your job attacked. Maybe worse in some cases. But cowardice is not an option. Not anymore. Until next time, you guys, pray for Charlie Kirk and his family. Pray for America. This is a very precarious time that we are living in. Pray for discernment of all people to understand these false dichotomies that they are trying to impose on us, the Hegelian dialectics and the games they're trying to play, putting the civilians against one another when ultimately it's not the left you need to be worried about. It's the ones who promote leftist ideologies, the authors of it, the financiers of it. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed this special episode. Pray for Charlie and his family. Pray for our nation. America first, and Christ is King.
Our country is at an inflection point. We can all feel it. And now is not the time to be a physically, mentally, or spiritually weak man. I've spent the last 10 years creating a blueprint for unfucking your life up, and it's a lot more than cleaning your room. How to achieve physical, mental, and spiritual mastery gives you a layman's understanding of how to master dieting and exercise, get the most out of your time, build ironclad mental fortitude, and leverage your faith to become a role model among men, something we desperately need right now in this time of war. I break down how to create a sustainable, flexible diet from scratch, how to organize your fitness routine, supplementation, and I dispel many myths and provide many red pills on dieting and exercise. The book is on sale right now at beholdentotruth.com for 20% off. Or you can get a free copy if you're a founding member of my Substack, which would also include a one-on-one 30-minute session with yours truly where you can ask me anything. Go to beholdentotruth.com right now to become the man that you were meant to be, and the man that we desperately need you to be.
The few brave men who have actually tried to go out and do something about white genocide or talk about Jewish influence, the Zionist-occupied government, we all know that they get crucified, their careers get destroyed, and so we need to find ways to support each other. One of the ways that I have done that is by creating my Substack, where there are exclusive early access to documentaries, my weekly vlogs, there are ebooks there. There's even an opportunity to set up a one-on-one 30-minute Ask Me Anything if you'd like. All of the proceeds from my Substack, from my YouTube channel, from the merch gets reinvested in the platform. I use that to pay my employees. I use that to buy the equipment that I need, the cameras, the lights, the MacBook, all the books, all of the software, pay for marketing, everything else, but also it protects my literal life. So if you want to help out, please do head on to Substack, get yourself a subscription. Thank you. I appreciate it. America first and Christ is King.